Hello everybody, welcome to this morning's Speakers for Schools virtual talk. We're delighted so many students from across our school network have been able to join us today. This session will last for around 45 minutes in total and will include a presentation from our speaker before moving to student Q&A. Questions for our speaker can be submitted via the Q&A function on the right hand side of your screen. This will be opened for the majority of today's presentation. Our speaker will be asking students questions for you to respond to in the Q&A thread. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all submitted questions. We have several hundred questions submitted in any talk we organise, and there's simply not enough time to answer them all, but rest assured your questions have been received. I'm delighted to welcome this morning's speaker, Charly Classen. Charly is a Vice Chair of the Special Olympics and has built a career over 20 years spanning the worlds of media, TV, sports, private equity and the charity sector. Charly has kindly agreed to join us today to discuss how sport has the ability to impact lives and to focus on demystifying the sports sector to give you more of an idea of the careers and jobs available across the wider sports industry. Charly, hi, welcome to your first Speakers for Schools virtual talk.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for having me, and thanks for everyone coming to listening. This is my first talk with Speakers for School. In fact, it's the first time I'm talking to a school audience. And when Carly asked me for the first time whether I wanted to do a talk for the Speakers for Schools, I said yes, absolutely. She then threw in, it's going to be a virtual talk and you won't be able to see anyone, which was truly petrifying. But I thought I'm going to push myself. The good thing is if I really go on, you all fall asleep, start yawning, I can't see you, so I can't react to that. But hopefully you'll stay awake and come with me on a little journey into the world of sports and how you can combine your passion with a job, but also seeing how sport has a real power to transform lives and be a force for good. So just to test your awake, what I'd like to do is actually start with a question for you. And as Carly said, if you are able to use the Q&A part and put your comments in, I want you to imagine that someone comes to you and says they work in sports and earn their living from sports. And I would like you to think about what images come to mind of someone working in sport. I'm going to wait for a couple of seconds so that Carly can actually receive some of your suggestions. And then I'm really intrigued to hear what kind of things you come up with. And Carly, maybe when you have some, we can go, or if there's too much delay,
no, absolutely. We've had a few students submit a couple of answers already, and a lot of them are focusing on the idea of actually working as an athlete or as a coach. A few students have suggested as well.
Okay, that seems good, which is lucky because that's where I want to start. Yes, when we think of sports, generally we think of athletes, whether it is fantastic athletes like Dean Asher-Smith, kind of this is her and the relay team winning European athletics gold, or whether it's someone like Jadon Sancho. And what you will find is there's a bit of a theme of Germanness throughout this presentation. That's partly because I'm German. I'm originally from Hamburg. Jadon Sancho, who now plays for Borussia Dortmund, a German club, one of the true talents of English football, I think. I'm not going to talk about the George Floyd injustice racism thing in this talk, but as a tangential side of power of sports, I think it's a great platform that sport is being used to show solidarity, to raise the awareness of what these issues are. And if that's something that people want to get into in the Q&A, I'm more than happy to do so. Another sports person I'd like to mention is Kevin Keegan. This picture is from 1979. I was 2. Probably none of you, or not many of you, will have heard of Kevin Keegan. He is a true legend of the game. This picture means quite a lot to me because my home club is Hamburg, and Kevin Keegan won the World Football of the Year here with the Palme d'Or. I think it's also a good illustration that COVID-19 is not the only reason for people to have big and bad hair. So yeah, it's unfortunately I have to go back to 1983, which I think is before any of you were born, is the last time that Hamburg won anything. So supporting sport can be hugely frustrating. Some of you mentioned coaches. Another great example. Yes, Jurgen Klopp, one of the fantastic coaches around, and one of the things I love about him is you can see the emotion on his face. It's all genuine what it means to him. But actually, I've got another Hamburg story for you, that we were going to hire Jurgen Klopp as a coach probably 6-7 seasons ago. He turned up to his interview in ripped jeans, and the club hierarchy decided in all its wisdom that he didn't fit the club image. So he went to Liverpool instead. So what happened is Liverpool, now reigning champions of Europe, Hamburg was relegated from the Bundesliga shortly afterwards, and we haven't been able to recover from that. So while this has nothing to do with sport, if someone judges you purely on your image and ripped jeans, please look beyond that. Talent is not reflected in someone's clothes. But Carly, I don't know, what other kind of suggestions have come through in terms of what people thought about working in sports?
We've had quite a few suggestions actually, ranging from physios to managers, referees, working in sports branding, journalists and personal trainers. Okay,
so this is a few pictures of the office I used to work in sports. And actually, yes, there are some journalists, but certainly no physios, no referees. In fact, there are lawyers, there are HR people, there are salespeople, there are accountants, there are programmers, there are developers, and actually all working in a really relaxed environment. So I want to show that to you to say, actually the world of sports is very, very wide. And I want to tell you a little bit of how I got into sports, what it means to me, and maybe how you can think about the sports industry as a whole. So I was working at ESPN for 13 years. I joined in 2006, which is when Germany hosted the World Cup last time. Unfortunately, I joined after the World Cup, so I wasn't able to get any tickets to the events. ESPN is the world's largest sports media company, but very, very big in the US. And maybe some of you have heard or seen The Last Dance, which has been streaming on Netflix here, the documentary about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan, which is a fantastic documentary series produced by ESPN, but also produces a huge amount of television websites. ESPN Cricket Info does cricket, ESPN FC does football, also report about all sports around the world as journalists, through podcasts, through films, through live sport. A great place to work. The way I got there is actually, I started my career after university. I worked for consultancy for a couple of years. The company I worked for went bankrupt, so I had to do something else. I went to work in television, a company called Fremantle Media. And then in 2006, I got a call from someone I had worked with once and saying, Charlie, would you want to work in sports for ESPN? And it was one of those calls which had a real impact on me, because I'd always loved sports. I thought I loved playing sports, although I was never particularly good at it. My sporting highlight of my career was I played badminton for Worcestershire County Council, which at the time, at the under 16 level, at the time Worcestershire was the worst county in the country, and I was the worst singles player on their team. So I think I was the worst county player in the country. That is as far as my sporting prowess went. But I loved it. I loved watching it. But it never occurred to me that actually I could be working in sports, because I just never made that connection. And I tell you that for two reasons. One is, when people talk about careers, don't think that everyone has a carefully thought out plan of how that's going to work. But also, if you're really passionate about something, try to think about it differently. So, as I said, within that world of sports, I was always very commercial. I did a lot of strategy work. I was always been quite good at finding new opportunities and seeing opportunities how people can build a new business, which you wouldn't normally associate with sport. But actually, that exactly was my role within ESPN, to saying, how could we take a brand that's really, really strong in the US, but very weak in Europe, and how can we grow that? And as I said, I absolutely loved my job. We had a wonderful ride. We acquired a few websites. We bought the Premier League rights. We had a channel in the UK with Premier League, Rugby, the FA Cup, the Bundesliga, some fantastic programming here for a few years. So it was amazing. So if you have a passion, whether that is you think you may want to get into journalism, or you really like how to develop websites and products, whether you actually really like working to make other people better through HR, whether you want to sell in sponsorship, whether you want to be in social media, all of those things exist in sport. In fact, I was trying to, my 13-year-old daughter, who has no interest in sport at all and thinks I'm going to bore pants out of all of you, she was trying to be quite facetious and thinking, okay, how about a scientist? Can that be in sports? Yes, you can be in sports, because actually there's lots of data science, but also looking at materials. How can you make better footballs, to how can you make more sustainable sports clothing? So virtually any passion you can think of or interest, you should be able to combine it in sport. And I think life is way too short to do things you don't enjoy doing. So trying to find a passion, and maybe sport is something you really like, maybe it isn't. But I would encourage you to look for those things that say, okay, I really enjoy it. That said, I thought I had one of the best jobs in the world. One of the perks I had is, actually, I was extremely lucky that I managed to go to a lot of sporting events. And I will tell you about one of my favorite sporting events in a second. But before I do that, I want you to have a look at the people working in the office. And one thing I like about it, it's a very relaxed environment. And on the left-hand side, you can see us doing the office bake-off just to get people together. But there's one real problem. They're predominantly men. And that's one of the real challenges in the sports industry, that it's still associated as a male profession. And actually, we would be so much stronger as an industry if we got a much wider set of people coming in the industry. Diversity of thought and acting on those thoughts, because it's not just hearing different things, but also listening to them and doing that, makes everyone takes better decisions. And it makes companies serve the interests much, much better. So one of the things I was very keen on, one of the best things we did at ESPN was we had about 10 interns of university students spend a year with us. Now, I always used to spend quite a lot of time with them, hearing what do they want from a sports media company. And we actually changed a lot of things to it. And women are still underserved. So any girls out there that like sports, please consider this as an industry for you. But let me come back to one of my favorite sporting events. And this is something that you probably will have never heard of. You probably never heard of any of the athletes involved. And I'd like to show you a video of an athlete called Barry. And Lily, if you can show the video, that would be great. Hopefully this will work. Good.
Bear with us one moment, the video will be with you shortly.
All right.
People look at you. They stare. They all stare. They point at you. They shout things. make you feel different. It's fantastic.
So this is the quality wasn't great, but I can probably share, or we can share the URL later if you want to rewatch it. So Barry is a Olympics, as part of the Special Olympics. So the Special Olympics is a charity worldwide that basically provides sports for people with intellectual disabilities and for those without. It's loosely aligned to the Olympic movement, but only in terms it has the name, and we have World Games every 4 years. But it really is about providing sport to children and adults with learning difficulties, week in, week out, who then have regional competitions, can go to national competitions, and then every 4 years to the World Games. I got involved in the Special Olympics through ESPN, where we were the worldwide media partner, so we tried to convince other broadcasters around the world to showcase the Olympics, or the Special Olympics, just as other sports are being done. And actually, Channel 4 has done amazing work with the Paralympics. Sadly, we won't be able to see the Olympics, Paralympics this year and have to wait for next year. But our ambition is to showcase sport of people with intellectual disabilities, just like the Paralympics for people with physical disabilities. So the charity is about transforming lives through sport. And just to give you context of how big an issue intellectual disability is in this country, there are about 1.5 million children and adults who have intellectual disabilities. About half of them live in poverty. But actually, having intellectual disability is not a problem, is not a bad thing. Actually, it's a wonderful thing. And the more time you spend with people with intellectual disabilities, the more enriching it can be. And there's so much we can learn from it. But one of the real challenges is that 8 out of 10 of them are bullied and quite often socially excluded, and have to really suffer as a result from that. And I don't know, I remember that when I got involved in the Special Olympics, I have no family connection for anyone with special intellectual disabilities. I thought it was quite awkward. So how do I speak to them? But what happens if someone with Downs talks to me? I don't know what to say. And I remember through my involvement in Special Olympics, actually one thing I did was play a unified 5-a-side football match. So that is everyone playing together on a pitch. And frankly, once you do that, you forget about all your differences, because you're all mucking around, having a great time, playing sport, and you embrace it, and you laugh, you hug, and you come away from it so much enriched and so much of a better person. But actually, I want to tell you the story of Greg. Greg is another Special Olympics athlete, Greg Sylvester. This is a picture of him quite a few years ago. When he was at school, he was bullied. He became very shy, didn't want to talk to people, interact. And he got involved in the Special Olympics, and he started doing gymnastics, and he became very, very good at it. You can see the picture on the left, Greg with all his medals. So he went off to the World Games, traveled to places, got amazing experiences. But actually, what sport did, it gave him confidence. He made friends. He started laughing. He started getting discipline, getting routines. So that didn't just mean that he became an athlete. It also meant that he got the confidence to become a coach. And Greg is a qualified gymnastics coach, coaching both people with intellectual disabilities, but everyone else too. Now he's also a table tennis player, and he's got Downs. But actually, Greg has taken that a lot further still. Greg works for the National Grid. He's a public speaker. He has probably raised close to £2 million for the Special Olympics by meeting prime ministers. He was a board member with me on the Special Olympics for 9 years. He's just come off because he's come to the end of his term. He's featured in a BBC documentary. And recently I gave a speech, or actually Greg and I gave a speech at a big sports conference. And luckily, Greg did most of the talking. And in fact, listening to Greg and what he has achieved is way, way more impressive than virtually anyone else you will hear in these talks, and certainly far more impressive than anything I ever did. And I feel so lucky to have met Greg and consider him a friend, and he should be talking. And he will be talking. Actually, we're talking to Carly about, can we, Greg and a few others, to do some talks. But that is, for me, the power of sport, that not only is playing sport good for your physical health, for your mental health, but sport also brings people together. And not only has it changed Greg's life, it's also changed the life of his parents, of the people who he plays with, of the volunteers. So the ripple effect is huge. So two main things I really want you to think about as you think about the world of sport. One is, sport is for everyone. You don't have to be an amazing athlete. If you are lucky enough to be hugely talented to make it as a professional, go for it. My assumption is that 95% of people listening will not have that talent, sadly. That doesn't mean that sport is not for you. Sport, you can be any shape or size. You don't even have to play. In fact, some people didn't even love sports, but just love the industry. But the other thing is, how can you look at sport and use that as a force for good? And I showed the picture of Jadon Sancho earlier. Raheem Sterling talks about racism in a very powerful way, so it can amplify those messages. You're starting to get some athletes talking about environment sustainability. You've got organizations like the Special Olympics that really engage excluded parts of the society to make us a more inclusive society. So if you do want to get involved in the Special Olympics, I mean, one of the things you can do is come up with innovative fundraising ideas, where how can we enable more athletes to take part? And if that is something you're interested in, you can get in touch with us as an organization. And if the ideas are great, we can get some of the athletes involved in that, and you will feel good about it. We also will do something like a virtual games, because sadly, people with intellectual disabilities quite often have underlying health conditions, so they can't quite come out of lockdown yet, and will take longer for everyone else to come back. So how do we make sure everyone stays active, healthy? So we're trying a few virtual things. So if any of you have got great ideas of what we can do, please do get in touch. So thank you so much for listening. Hopefully some of you stayed awake, and I look forward to answering any questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Charlie. We've had a lot of questions submitted to you, which is fantastic. So I've just broken those down into a few broad themes. And initially, I think we'll focus on your career and I guess your passion and motivation for what you do, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. So one of our students here, Will, has asked, why do you like sports so much? What is it that appeals to you about sports?
Well, thanks for the question. What do I love about sports so much? Well, it's a couple of things. Well, if I love playing sports, so I still play tennis, I still go for a run. So I love the way it makes me feel physically. And actually, I love the social aspect of it. So I found lockdown really hard in the sense that running was fine and I felt better, but I missed seeing friends and actually having the social interaction with it. And sport is such a wonderful way to make connections with other people and build friendships around. So that's on the playing side, what I really love about it. And there's the competitive side, that actually hitting a ball or shuttlecock or playing footy or rugby, there's just great fun involved. But what I love about the industry is partly it's nice to be able to go and say, what are your job? And I said, well, part of my job is to watch sports on television and read about sports and buy sports rights and sell sports rights and go to events. That usually gets a lot better reaction than saying I'm a lawyer or I'm a banker. People seem to want to talk about it. And the other thing is actually the ability of sport to transform and impact lives. So fandom is something really special. So if many of you who will be supporting football clubs, if your club wins or loses, it matters. And that is why, for example, sponsors come to sports so much, because sports has an emotional connection that make us act differently. And actually at ESPN, we did some tests that if your team won, you want to advertise good things, holidays. When your team lost, actually it was probably quite good to advertise insurance because you were in kind of much more depressed mood and worried about bad things happening. So sport has a real impact on your emotional state, by and large in a good way, and it brings communities together and has the ability to transform people's lives. That's what I love about it.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Quite a few of our students have also asked, what's your favourite sport, either to play or to watch or to be involved with?
So it's changed. As when I was young, my favourite sport to play was badminton. Now that I'm getting older and slower, and I find it hard to play any competitive, now it's mainly tennis. To watch, I love watching tennis. I love going to a rugby game in person, and I love watching football on television. But actually, I like most sports. Despite being German, I've embraced cricket. I really enjoy 2020, and one of the most enlightening experiences I've had was watching an IPL game in India with one of the editors, who was actually able to explain why everyone was standing in a specific place on the cricket pitch, why every ball mattered in a 2020 game, and sometimes being able to see and understand sport through different lenses. So I've become a generalist, passionate follower of sports.
That's great. Thank you so much. One of our students here, Neve, has asked, who has inspired you throughout your career or inspires you today?
It's actually a couple of people inspired me throughout my career. I mean, one of it is a very random thing, is my aunt, who unfortunately is no longer with us. She is actually Bolivian. My mother's Bolivian. They were born in Bolivia, although my mother moved to Germany. The reason my aunt inspired me, because she became a doctor very early on, and very much focused on setting up a hospital for some of the poorest areas of La Paz, and Bolivia is a very poor country. So she had a real passion for doing the right things. She wanted to become a doctor, a medic, and she combined her passion of medicine with doing the right thing. And I have no interest in being a doctor. I would be a useless doctor. So actually I found the world of media is actually one of my passions, and I'm quite good at it. But being able to combine one of the things you care about, what gives you joy from doing in your day-to-day work, but also trying to find things that make a difference, that I think is a true inspiration to me, which is why I got very involved in the Special Olympics. So that's in some ways probably my biggest inspiration.
That's fantastic, thank you. And Jack asks, what is the most memorable part of your career?
What is my most memorable part of my career? There are a number of them. Two of them are probably linked with the Premier League. One is we've been working probably for 3 years very hard to see how can we get the Premier League rights in the UK. And when we won the Premier League, or package of the Premier League rights, on the back of that we had to launch a channel in 6 weeks. So from going from scratch, and actually one of the talents we hired was Kevin Keegan, who played for football a long time ago, and he became one of the talents on our show. But actually, it was a real highlight seeing all of that come together, and in a very short period of time, taking something that was on paper to making it real. Probably one of the lowlights was losing the Premier League rights to BT, and not because we lost, because someone else comes in and pays more for the rights. That's business. That's the way it happens. But was really hard was, as a result, we had to shut certain businesses down, sell some businesses, and let some people go. And those people had done a phenomenal job creating amazing products, TV shows, editorial content. And I don't think anyone could have done a better job than them. And nothing they had done contributed to us losing the rights. So sometimes having to carry out the impacts of hard decisions is probably one of the most memorable things. And I learned a huge amount from it, and probably did some things wrong and right, but also got a lot of things wrong, and you learn from these mistakes. So it's kind of the ups and downs from that, and the Premier League is probably quite a good example around that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing those kind of insights into your career there, Charlie. So now just moving on to the wider sports sector, a few of our students have questions about the potential skills and challenges that those working in the sports sector might face. So Maria is really interested in knowing what challenges are most commonly faced by people in a career in sports, on their way to a career in sports, and alongside that, are there any skills that you think are really important for young people to succeed in a career in sport as well?
So I think probably the biggest barrier is knowing how to get into sports. So sport is quite a fragmented industry, with actually most of the players are quite small. So it's very different from going to the banking sector or going into consumer goods, where there are lots of very structured graduate programs. Because sports has so many small to medium-sized companies that actually there's no straightforward path for people. So the way to get into it is reaching out to people that you may know or may not know in the sports industry, demonstrate that you have an interest, volunteer at different areas, so show that you not only have an interest but actually doing things about it, and ask people, try to find people through friends of friends or connections, or even if you just don't know them, if there's some topic you particularly care about, just contact people and ask them whether they have time. And the worst thing you can do is get a no. And most often than not, people love talking about themselves and what they do. So that's probably the biggest barrier. In terms of skills that are particularly important, I'm probably going to have a very unhelpful, broad answer, partly because there's so many different types of roles in sport that it probably depends on specialist skills, depending on what it is. But I think the underlying thing which is really important is an ability to problem solve. So how do you, because ultimately business is about solving challenges, problems, and coming with a good opportunity. And the other thing is communication. So how do you communicate what you're thinking about? That could be via social media, that could be in the written word, it could be through presentations. And the last thing is building relationships. Work, and this doesn't apply to sports, I think this applies to everything, is ultimately we get things done with and through other people. So building relationships that are not just what I say functional, saying I need you to do X and that's why I'm going to contact you. How can you make sure you stay in touch with people even when you don't need something from them? As you build proper relationships that build on trust and mutual support, and don't just look at what can that person do for me, but also look at what can I do to help the other person. And I suppose empathy and understanding the needs of other people. Generally, I find if you're able to help others, they will help you. So I'm not sure any of that is very specific to sport, other than the sport is probably a very fragmented industry, so it doesn't have the normal structures that makes it easier to work in some of the much bigger established industries.
That's wonderful, thank you. And just reflecting on the comment you made there about sports being quite a fragmented industry, a few of our students have asked questions around quite specific areas. So the first there is, could art and photography help with a sports career? And the second there is, can we get involved in sports through science? Will science benefit sports? Does it benefit sports? Do you have any thoughts on those two questions at all?
So I think it's an absolute yes. Having creativity, so arts and photography, which generally are quite creative subjects, it's a lot of it. I talked about one of the reasons I love sport is because sport is about emotion. And actually, I don't consider myself overly creative in terms of kind of things like photography, arts. I'm terrible at drawing. And I wish it's a skill I had more of. So, because actually pictures and illustrations usually say so much more than words. So, and sport is about communicating in the end. So honing those skills and knowing, I don't know, whether it's communication via social media, if you present those things in a consistent way, but also in an interesting way, both in terms of how it looks visually, but also in message, that is hugely powerful and valuable. On the scientific side, science is very, very broad. So again, there's the sports industry becoming more and more professional in some ways. So if you go back 20 years, it's very much, oh, I know so and so and so and so, and it's a gut instinct, and sport is not a science, and therefore we just do it because that's my experience. I think that's right. The sports industry, both on the professional side and in terms of how you play, but also in the industry, is becoming a lot more data-driven. There's a lot more rigor behind why certain decisions are taken. So that type of science works. Well, as I say, I work in the sports media part of it, but actually there's a lot of work with scientists of what are the right materials for sports. And that is both in terms of equipment, but also in terms of wearables, which is changing the way both people train, how we analyze performance, and that is extremely science-led. So yes, absolutely. And the other great thing about scientists, usually they have quite analytical brains. So you need that creative side to bring people along, but you also need the analytical side. So ideally is you feel really passionate about one side and hone those, but keep some of the other side as well and try to mix them a little bit.
That's great, thank you so much. We have time for a couple more questions here, if that's okay. Brooke has asked, I have a brother who is autistic and he seems to love playing sports, but doesn't really seem to embrace this with my family. How do you think we can help to make him more confident?
Oh, I wish I could give you a really good answer. And actually, as much as I love playing sport, I've spent the last 13 years to try to convince my daughter that she should play sport. And whenever I try to play with her, she just doesn't want to. And actually, bizarrely, she probably won't want me to talk about it, but COVID-19 has made her go and run by herself. And actually, I went for my first run with her the other day, and there was absolutely nothing I did, but it's purely because of what she wanted to do. So it's very roundabout of saying that partly I don't have a great answer, not knowing your brother, not knowing your situation, but I think it's quite often sometimes accepting that maybe the family is not the right environment to play sport. Maybe it is with others to play sport, and that is fine too. And sometimes the more empathy we have for understanding what drives someone, but also what puts people off. So why aren't people doing sport? And those causes could be so manifold that some people don't like the competitive angle and actually just want to play, and they find other people being competitive really off-putting. Some people have the reverse, saying I need to win, and unless there's competitive angle involved, there's no point. Some people feel actually my body shape and being out in public, the way I look may not be the right thing, and I don't want that. And sometimes the more we can understand what motivates people, but also what puts people off, the more likely as we can change it. But sometimes it's accepting that actually sometimes other people are better to be the provider, be their friends, and sometimes we can't do everything, and as much as we want to help and do these things, it doesn't always work. So I'm not sure how helpful that is, but
I think that's a really honest answer. Thank you so much, Charlie. One last question that we have time for that's very popular on our Q&A thread is who is the most famous athlete you've ever met, Charlie?
Who's the most famous athlete I've ever met? I'm not sure. So I've met Kevin Keegan, but he's clearly not the most famous sports person, because you probably not if you've heard of them. Who's the most famous athlete I've met? So it's very weird that as much as I absolutely love sports, I'm actually not particularly bothered about athletes in a strange way. I kind of see them as normal people like you and me, and I've never been particularly starstruck. I love what they perform on the pitch, and sometimes if they stand for something, that's what I really love. So I've met Gary Lineker, I've met probably quite a few people. The fact that I can't even remember probably tells you a lot of it. Bizarrely, that's not the side of sport I care about that much. I love watching athletes perform. It's hugely inspiring. But actually, I love being with friends and people I know much more. That's why I get much of my energy from. So it's probably a slightly unexpected left field answer.
No, I think that's fantastic, actually. And I think that's really great that, enjoying playing sports with your friends is where you can see that passion as well, which is really exciting and I think really useful. A huge thank you for joining us today, Charlie. Unfortunately, it's all we have time for this morning. But really kind of big thank you to you for joining us and talking to us about the sports industry, challenging some of the ideas about the roles that exist across the sports industry. And I think the information about how young people can access those and some information about the Special Olympics as well was really, really fantastic. So thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, and hopefully I've inspired at least one person to look at both the Special Olympics and consider sport as a career. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Just a quick announcement for students who have tuned in. We have shared a feedback form in the Q&A thread. It'd be fantastic if you could complete that. We've also published the colour for today's talk, which is raspberry. You only need that if you're completing the student activity sheet for your school or college. A huge thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you for future virtual talks. Tomorrow we actually have an in-collaboration event with Penguin, so do check out the Speakers to Schools website to see more about that event. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.